Hey guys, in this video the lovely team is going to be taking you through political ideology. This is something you need for your GCSE in Citizenship. Now there's lots of facts and bits in here that you need to remember. So to help you remember all the bits that you need to, over our website there are loads and loads of multiple choice questions for you.
A political ideology is a system of beliefs and values which guides one in actions and policies. Many things contribute to the ideology of an individual, which include their upbringing and parents. Parents especially, and the way in which they bring their children up, has a huge impact on the later political ideology of those children. A person's education, and especially the setting in which that education has occurred, also has a big impact. Many prominent conservative politicians went through the private school system and later to Oxford and Cambridge University. Many Labour and left-wing politicians went through the comprehensive school system and then on to polytechnics and non-Oxbridge universities. Circumstances, especially financial circumstances and personal experiences, also have a huge impact. Identity and ethnicity can also contribute to someone's ideology, either because their identity lends them a certain ideology, or because they have felt pressured or intimidated or discriminated against because of their ideology, which can drive them to one extreme or another. Conservatism has been a perennial centre-right ideology, which has been present in many Western countries for a very long time, several centuries. Conservatism has a focus on the responsibility of the individual rather than the responsibility of the state. Therefore, there is a support for individual enterprise and businesses, a wish to keep things broadly the same, to conserve them without making sweeping and radical changes, a respect for traditional values, traditional gender roles in marriage and in work, and traditional ways of life. Conservatism has therefore traditionally been seen as the party of older people and the party of agriculture, farming, and in Britain, of rurality. This lends to a patriotism and respect for the armed forces, and a belief in limited government, the belief that government should only do what is necessary rather than try and involve itself in every aspect of a citizen's private life. Conservatives tend to have a support for private enterprise. All ideologies are associated with certain people, and specific ideologies can be given their name. Examples of conservative ideology include Thatcherism and Reaganism. There is also Trumpism. Thatcher, Reagan, Trump, and Cameron have been prominent conservatives in recent years. Examples of conservative political parties include the Conservative Party in the UK, UKIP, the UK Independence Party, and the Brexit Party. In the United States, the Republican Party is regarded as a conservative party. Socialism has been regarded as a mainstream left-wing ideology, which has varied in how far left it has been seen. For much of the 20th century, socialism or democratic socialism was regarded as the mainstream of the left wing, especially of British politics. Recently, as politics has shifted to the right, the traditional ideas of socialism have seemed more radical, and it's been seen as being further to the left. Socialism believes in the need to redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor, usually through taxation. The idea being that you have higher tax rates on high earnings, and then use that money to fund better public services, especially targeted towards the poor and needy in society. There is therefore a willingness to have higher taxes for higher public spending. There is also a willingness to make changes, sometimes radical reforms, to achieve goals of equality. Socialism also has a belief in progressive values of equality rather than tradition. Examples of this include the rights of LGBTQ+ people, also the rights of the disabled. A key example of this can be seen at the end of the Labour government's time in power when the Equality Act 2010, that piece of legislation, set many of these key beliefs in progressive values and equality into force of law. Socialists therefore tend to have less respect for traditional values and roles. A good example of this is the way in which many traditional socialists, people like Tony Benn, were Republicans, believing in the abolition of the monarchy in the UK, replacing it with an elected president. There is also a belief in the dignity of working people and the working class. Examples of specific politicians which can be called socialist would be Clement Attlee, Prime Minister after World War II, who instituted much of what we regard as the welfare state. His government was instrumental in bringing in the NHS, for example. Jeremy Corbyn, Labour leader from 2015 through to 2020, who, while he didn't win an election, was instrumental in taking the Labour Party further to the left than it had been during the New Labour years. Tony Benn, a prominent political figure in the Labour Party from the 1950s through to the 1980s and early 1990s, has also been regarded as a socialist. Examples of parties in the UK would be the traditional Labour Party, what was seen as old Labour, up to 1994, and then from 2015. The intervening gap in the middle is thought of as New Labour under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. The Green Party in the UK is definitely left of centre and has also often been seen as a socialist party. There are many socialist parties abroad. Centrism, sometimes known as liberalism, and rarely also known as third-way politics, is ideas around the centre of political beliefs. Traditionally, centrists, sometimes also known as moderates, have tried to appeal to both voters on the left wing and right wing, and therefore seek the highest possible public mandate in elections. Traditionally, centrism has a belief in a mixed economy, with elements of private enterprise where it is necessary, but also public ownership where necessary. A good example of this would be the railway system in Britain, where the actual physical railway tracks themselves are owned and run by Network Rail, a government enterprise, but the carriages and services on them are in private hands. Centrism often has support for the individual and individual rights, and a belief in the goodness of individual liberty, but without restrictions on private enterprise. There is support and respect for business. However, this may be combined with strong employment rights legislation, making it clear that the government will support business, but they must act fairly and responsibly. There is often a focus on collaboration in government, bringing in elements from the left and right wings, and a willingness to make changes and reforms, but to make them more gradual. There are several key examples of politicians who represent a centrism or third-way politics. For example, Blair and Brown during the New Labour government. Indeed, in their case, they gave birth to Blairism and Brownism, two key ideologies which is regarded as ideologising the third way. Nick Clegg, leader of the Liberal Democrats in the coalition government, is also regarded as a centrist and liberal politician. If we go back slightly further through history, we reach Harold Wilson, often regarded as the first truly centrist Prime Minister, a Prime Minister who tried to unite the left and right wings of the Labour Party. The Labour Party from 1994 to 2015, often called New Labour, especially from 1994 to 2010, was regarded as a centrist party. Traditionally, the Liberal Democrats have represented the centre ground in British politics. Fascism is regarded as the ideology of the very far right. Fascists have a belief in social Darwinism, the idea that the weak deserve to fail. Their weakness makes them deserving of failure, of ethnic superiority, and endorsed racism as government policy. The idea that one race is genetically inherently superior to another race. There is usually government bias in favour of employers over employees. The idea that because employers are strong, they deserve to rule over their employees, who individually are weak. There is traditionally an almost worship of the military and the strength it represents. A very, very strong nationalism, a belief in the superiority of the nation and the nation state, and heavy patriotism, usually where individuals are compelled through force or through peer pressure to support the state, not criticising the government. Usually fascism results in a dictatorial and brutal form of government with heavy repression of individual civil rights and the press. There are several examples in history of fascist governments and fascist individuals. The most obvious of these is Hitler, who ruled Germany from 1933 to 1945. Mussolini, the first fascist leader, who gained the word fascist from the Latin word fascisti. Latterly, there has been Bolsonaro, an almost openly fascist leader currently in Brazil. Examples of parties include the NSDAP, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, present in Germany from 1933 to 45. There's also the National Fascist Party of Italy, there through 1925 to 1945. Fascism has never had a strong hold on British politics, although there were openly fascist politicians such as Oswald Mosley, and then parties of the far right such as the National Front and the BNP. Many people make the argument that UKIP represents a form of fascism in Britain. Many people have concerns that the current government is a conservative one heading quickly and increasingly to the far right. However, currently there are very few far-right fascist regimes around the world. Many people accuse governments of being fascist, but because fascism is a very difficult definition to nail down, it is difficult to actually say which governments are fascist. Communism, sometimes also called communitarianism, is the far left of politics. Communists believe in a completely controlled economy. Rather than private enterprise, the government directs the economy completely. Everything is owned by the state. There is therefore no private enterprise. This leads to a theoretical equality of pay and conditions, the idea that everybody is paid the same for their labour. There is no rich and poor, and therefore no inequality in society. As communist regimes are born, they tend to undergo the forced removal of goods and money from the wealthy. Whatever the inequality difference may be, those on the top, be they peasants or aristocrats, tend to find their assets forcibly seized from them. Often that can lead to exile or even execution. Marxist and Leninist communism, stemming from the ideologies of Karl Marx and Lenin, tends to have a belief in the inevitable fall and failure of capitalism, and therefore a wish to spread communism and communist uprisings and revolutions to other countries. Communism today is rare, although through the Cold War from 1945 to about 1990, communism was one of the two ideologies which dominated the tension between East and West. In many Western countries, liberal democracy has replaced communism. However, communism is still present in some countries around the world, although often it has been reformed to include elements of other ideologies to make it more palatable. Communism inevitably leads to a dictatorship and a repressive government, and therefore many communists feel that to gain power in a country, they have to include elements of democracy. Where communist regimes are already present, they tend to have gradual political reforms to prevent revolution against them. Examples of politicians which either do or have had a communist ideology include Lenin and Stalin in Russia and then the USSR, Ho Chi Minh of Vietnam, and Fidel Castro, the leader of Cuba. Examples of parties include the small Communist Party of Britain, which has never had electoral success, the CPSU, the official Communist Party of what was the Soviet Union. The Communist Party of China, of course, is a communist party currently in power.
Ouch. Love you too, Clem.